weirdly appropriate that this video is coming out a week late because have you heard about avoidance? I sort of equated avoidance with procrastination back there, but that's not quite right. The sort of avoidance that I want to talk about today is a huge part of PTSD and complex PTSD. In fact, it's one of the main diagnostic criteria. So let's talk about what exactly we mean when we say avoidance or avoidance behaviors. I'll go over some of the different forms it can take, and I want to talk about how it manifests itself for me personally. I'll also share why these behaviors can be problematic and how I've been learning to recognize my own avoidant behaviors and move away from them. I'm Jen Tatro, and I'm not a therapist. I am a person who has struggled with complex PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and I am determined to live a thriving life even with all of that going on. A lot of therapy and a lot of time spent getting to the root of the way my brain works and why it works the way it does has helped me immensely. So when I learn something new, I try to pass it on to the next person who might benefit from the same information. Consider me your mental health comrade. I'm here to share the knowledge I gain and remind you that you are not alone. So, avoidance. Tell me if you resonate with this at all. You are scrolling through your favorite social media site, enjoying a mix of cats riding Roombas and cute zoo animals and what I wore pictures, and you happen upon a post from someone who's, let's say their spouse died in a tragic accident. And you read it and you feel your chest tighten and your breathing changes. By the way, this is what we mean when we talk about being triggered. And your first reaction is to close the app entirely, find something, anything that feels more safe, and occupy your mind so you don't have to think about what you just read. Or maybe you even unfollow that person because you know they're going to be talking about that thing, and that scares you, and you don't want to feel those emotions, and you don't want to have those physical reactions again. This is avoidance in PTSD terms. Whenever you encounter something that reminds you of your trauma, be that something direct, like an auto accident or a sexual assault or an act of war, or something more indirect that connects back to something like childhood abandonment or neglect or abuse, your first instinct is to do whatever you have to do to not have to think about it, ever. And it shows up in more ways than just blocking social media posts. Maybe you take the long route to work to avoid passing a certain intersection, or you can't bear to read certain news headlines, or you open a bottle of wine whenever you start to feel lonely, or you turn off NPR whenever Terry Gross comes on because she always wants to talk about death. That last one might be specific to me. Some other ways avoidance shows up in my life. I find myself getting sleepy whenever I approach difficult topics. This happens a lot when I'm writing these sorts of video scripts. Sleep is an easy escape for me from writing or talking about things that are difficult. When I feel scared or lonely or overwhelmed, I often turn to reading to avoid feeling my own feelings. That was super hard for me to admit because books are such an important part of my life and my childhood, and I feel so strongly about the power of literature, but The truth is, I have been using fiction in an unhealthy way since I learned to read. It's a means to shut off my emotion and funnel my mind towards something that disconnects me from reality. Even before Kevin, my husband, was diagnosed with cancer, I was terrified of losing my spouse. And that's something that I only realized recently was connected to my parents' divorce when I was young. When the actor Patton Oswalt's wife died unexpectedly a few years ago, he began talking about it in interviews and as part of his comedy. I blocked his name on social media and in my news feeds. I have unsubscribed from newsletters and unfollowed people on social media for similar reasons. I just couldn't face the topics they were talking about. I basically hold my breath all October because of the proliferation of pink breast cancer ribbons in that month. And I avoid buying anything with a pink ribbon on it because it can trigger me to see those in my home. I often put off routine doctor's appointments because I'm terrified they'll find something wrong with me. I think that last item on the list, putting off medical appointments, is also the starkest example of how avoidance behaviors can be problematic. It's easy to understand how putting off a routine screening could lead to an issue being discovered later than otherwise when it is more of a problem. It's a bit harder to understand how other avoidance behaviors can be damaging. But it comes down to this. Avoiding feelings, and even when avoidant behaviors center around physical things, the feelings are what we're truly avoiding. Avoiding feelings allows them to retain power over you. As long as you use avoidance as a coping mechanism, you are spending your life bracing and being on guard for the next trigger. You are quite literally feeding your anxiety and allowing it to grow. And if avoidance is your go-to, like it was mine, you are also training yourself to keep adding to the list of things that you need to avoid. Eventually, you are using up all of your energy on avoidance, and you have nothing left for healing. Unfortunately, letting go of avoidance isn't as easy as saying, "Welp, I'm just going to face my fears, I guess." You can't just grab your sword and step boldly into the dragon's lair. There was a reason we developed avoidance behaviors, and that was because we felt like we needed them to survive. And since I'm currently making this video, and you're currently watching it, we have survived. It has worked. Only, I think the fact that you're watching this video and I'm making this video also means that we haven't really been thriving and we are seeking a way out. And I don't know about you, but I want to thrive. The first time I talked to my therapist about avoidance behaviors, I gave her the example I gave you earlier about listening to an episode of Fresh Air, turning to talk about death and grieving. And she asked me why I felt drawn to that topic, drawn to it. I didn't, I told her. I turned it off. And she said, "But you didn't turn it off because you were bored or because it was uninteresting to you. You turned it off because there was a part of you that couldn't help but listen to it." No, I did it because I couldn't bear to listen to it, I told her. And she said, "Because you couldn't help yourself, because you were drawn to it." I insisted again that I didn't want to listen, but she had a point. For whatever reason, I was just incapable of tuning it out. So she said to me, "What if you hadn't turned it off? What would have happened?" I know what would have happened. I would have found myself bawling in the grocery store after I got out of my car. I would have felt scared and overwhelmed and lost and lonely and incapable and so many other terrifying emotions that I do not want to feel. But they would just be feelings. They wouldn't actually put me in danger. Before that discussion, avoiding things had been second nature. I didn't really think about it. I just had an invisible checklist in my brain of the things that made me nope right out of there. I started paying attention. I started noticing. One of the most important things meditation has taught me over the past few years is that the best way to manage feelings is to acknowledge them and then to simply let them exist, to sit with them and explore them without judgment, to give them air rather than locking them away. I was reading a book recently where one character told another, "Perhaps if you would sit down with that boulder you're carrying, it would be easier than holding it over your head." So I've started doing that. Just noticing what I'm avoiding and allowing myself a moment to connect it to a feeling, to acknowledge that feeling's existence and sit with it. That's it. That is all it takes. And look, I get that you can't always predict what will come up, and it's not practical to be walking through the grocery store or delivering a work presentation while crying your eyes out. A little avoidance is okay as a treat. But taking the steps to face our feelings just a tiny bit at a time, that can start to make that avoidance less necessary. It can make triggers less powerful and less likely to blindside us. It can turn feelings into just feelings. That being said, I still don't buy the yogurt with the pink ribbon lids. And I sometimes choose to turn off Terry Gross when she's being maudlin. And I'm going to reward myself with a nap as soon as I finish this video. But every day I practice. And every day I come a little closer to that thriving life that I want. And I want the same for you. Until next time, I am wishing you love and joy and all of those good things. And I can't wait to talk to you again.